The house was silent, too silent. The kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful but hollow, like something was missing. Claire Dawson walked through the towering doorway at exactly 7 a.m., just as she had every day for 3 years. Her shoes barely made a sound on the marble floor, her citrus-scented gloves tucked in her tote bag, her dark hair pulled neatly into a bun. She was the kind of woman people didn't notice unless something was wrong, and this morning, something was deeply wrong. She had never been asked to care for the child. In a mansion like this, there were rules, roles, lines you didn't cross. But then she heard it, a sharp cry that cut through the cold quiet like shattered glass. A baby's cry, not the hungry or sleepy kind, a cry soaked in fear, in abandonment. And in that moment, everything changed. A forgotten child, a missing nanny, a handwritten note that would unravel the walls of privilege and protocol. A housekeeper who was never supposed to be seen, suddenly the only one who saw him. What would you do if the life of a child was thrust into your arms and no one else came? What happens when love shows up in the most unexpected place, not from a mother or a father, but from someone who simply refused to walk away? And what if that single act of compassion, bathing a baby in the kitchen sink, could melt the stone heart of a man who had locked himself away for years? This story is not about perfection. It's about how family begins, even when no one planned for it. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to John's Stories channel for more powerful, emotional dramas like this one every single day.
Claire Dawson never ran late. The Rivera estate, tucked behind tall iron gates and a long, curved driveway, had been her place of quiet purpose for years. She knew every corner of the home, every creak of its polished hardwood floors, every stubborn window latch that needed a careful touch. Her life was simple, private, predictable. Nathan Rivera, the man who owned this sprawling estate, was a name most people only read about in architectural journals or saw receiving awards on TV. Genius, recluse, widower. Claire had only ever seen glimpses of him. A coat tossed on a chair, the sound of footsteps above her as she polished the living room tiles. Occasionally, his deep voice carried through the halls when he was on a call, but he never spoke to her beyond a nod. She didn't mind. She wasn't hired to be seen. She was there to keep the glass gleaming, the rugs vacuumed, the order intact. That morning had started like any other. Cold air met her cheeks as she walked from the staff entrance to the main foyer. She rolled up her sleeves, filled her bucket with lemon water, and began her weekly ritual of scrubbing the staircase railings. Then came the cry. It was startling in its desperation. It wasn't the kind babies make for food or out of boredom. It was raw, like fear, like abandonment. She froze mid-motion, her rag dripping. For a moment, she hesitated. It wasn't her job. She wasn't the nanny. She wasn't even supposed to be on the second floor unless explicitly directed. But instinct doesn't wait for permission. She dropped the cloth into the bucket, heart pounding, and rushed up the stairs, the echo of her footsteps sounding alarmingly loud in the silence. The nursery door was ajar. Claire pushed it open and immediately felt her stomach turn. The room smelled sour, wet fabric, old milk, something worse. Little Lucas Rivera was standing in his crib, his onesie soaked through, his face red and puffy from crying. The mattress was damp, the air cold. Toys lay scattered, untouched. No sign of a bottle, or warmth, or care. And then, on the small side table, she saw it. A note, hastily scribbled. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. Don't try to contact me." Claire stared at it, hands trembling. The nanny had left. Just left. She looked down at the boy. He couldn't have been more than 18 months old. His eyes met hers, wide and wet, tiny arms outstretched. It would have been easier to step away, to call someone and wait, to let the household manager deal with it. But there are moments in life when you're not asked, you're called. She stepped into the room. Lucas whimpered as she gently lifted him. He clung to her shirt, his tiny fists gripping like a lifeline. His skin was sticky with cold urine, his breath hiccuped with exhaustion. Claire's mind raced. The downstairs bathroom only had a standing shower, useless for a baby. The grand master tub was in Nathan's suite, a place she was forbidden to enter. House rules. But then her eyes landed on the large stainless steel sink in the kitchen. She had scrubbed it clean 1,000 times, never imagined it could be used for this. But life doesn't always come with a plan. She laid a thick towel in the bottom of the basin, tested the water on her elbow like her mother once taught her, and began undressing the boy with slow, reassuring hands. "You're okay now, sweetheart," she whispered, voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "You're safe." Lucas didn't speak, but he didn't need to. His gaze stayed fixed on her, unblinking, searching. Claire bathed him gently, rinsing his hair with cupped hands, wiping away the grime with soft, circular motions. The smell of baby soap replaced the stench of neglect. She hummed a lullaby, half remembered, half improvised, as steam swirled around them in the quiet kitchen. For a moment, time paused. The world became small, just a sink, a child, a woman who refused to let him suffer alone. When the bath was done, she wrapped him in one of the oversized towels from the linen closet and held him against her chest, rubbing small circles on his back. His breathing slowed. She found a clean set of baby clothes, likely untouched in a drawer, and dressed him with practiced care. Though Claire had never had children of her own, something in her hands moved as if they had done this before in another life. Lucas didn't cry, didn't whimper, just nestled into her like she was home. Claire sat on the living room couch, the baby asleep against her, one tiny fist wrapped around her index finger. She stared at the morning light seeping through the windows, dancing against the polished floor. She had crossed a line today, and she didn't regret a single step of it. But the moment was interrupted by the sound of a key turning in the front door. Her body stiffened. Lucas slept on.
The door swung open slowly, the hinges creaking under the weight of years. Footsteps entered, measured, expensive sounding. Leather on marble. Claire didn't have to look to know who it was. Nathan Rivera had returned. She had heard that sound hundreds of times before. The turn of his key, the hush of his coat as he walked inside without a word. But this time, her heart clenched. Not out of fear, not because she had done something wrong, but because she had done something deeply right and wasn't sure if he'd understand. Nathan paused at the threshold. His silhouette filled the entrance, the morning light casting a long shadow across the polished tiles. A sleek briefcase hung from his hand, a wireless earpiece nestled in one ear, still glowing with a blue LED. He didn't move forward. He just looked. Claire kept her eyes on Lucas, whose head was still resting gently against her chest. His little lips parted in sleep. One hand balled loosely against her shirt, like he never wanted to let go. Nathan's gaze shifted to the tiny pair of baby socks at the foot of the couch, to the towel draped over the armrest, still damp, to the faint scent of soap lingering in the air, baby soap. And finally, to her, the woman he had passed 1,000 times without truly seeing. His earpiece slipped from his ear, clattering silently onto the marble floor. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice low, strained, almost like he was asking himself more than her. Claire didn't flinch, didn't apologize. She looked up with a quiet steadiness. "Please, don't wake him," she said gently. "He just fell asleep." Nathan stepped closer. His brow furrowed, the sharp lines of his jaw clenched. "What did you do to my son?" The question didn't come with anger. It came with disbelief, like he was staring at something that made no sense in his carefully controlled world. Claire took a breath, cradling Lucas a little closer. "I found him alone in the nursery, soaked through, crying." Her voice was calm, unwavering. "The nanny left. She left a note." Nathan's eyes flicked toward the hallway, as if expecting someone to appear and say it wasn't true, but no one came. He took another step forward. He didn't say anything. He just stared at his son, at the peace on the child's face, at the small hand gripping a woman's shirt as if it were the only safe place left on earth. "You're not supposed to care for him," he said finally. "I know." There was a pause, a long, fragile pause where the air seemed to thicken between them. Nathan dragged a hand down his face, exhaling hard. "Give him to me," he said. Claire hesitated, not out of defiance, but out of instinct. She shifted slightly, preparing Lucas, supporting his neck as she gently transferred him into his father's arms. At first, everything seemed fine. Then, Lucas stirred. His eyes fluttered open, and panic bloomed. A deep, primal sob erupted from the boy's tiny lungs. He squirmed, flailing. His arms reached out not toward the man who held him, but back toward Claire. "No, no, no," he cried, gasping through hiccuped sobs. Nathan froze. He had never seen his son react this way. He looked terrified, inconsolable, and he didn't want his father. He wanted her. Claire stepped forward, instinct again, overriding protocol. "Please, I think he's still scared," she whispered. Nathan didn't argue. He placed Lucas back in her arms, awkwardly, cautiously, and the moment her hands wrapped around the boy, the cries stopped. Not slowed, stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. Lucas snuggled back into her shoulder, breathing deeply again, tears drying quietly on his cheeks. Nathan stared. A muscle twitched at the corner of his mouth. His briefcase slipped from his hand onto the floor beside him. This wasn't how the world worked. Not in this house, not in his plans. But it was real. A baby who refused comfort from his father and surrendered peacefully to a housekeeper. What did that say? About the nanny who had left? About himself? About everything. Before he could speak again, the click of another door opening broke the moment. Heels tapped across the marble with the rhythm of someone who believed they controlled the space they walked in. Mrs. Evelyn Green, longtime head housekeeper and household manager, entered with her usual impeccable composure. She took one glance at the scene. The baby cradled in Claire's arms, Nathan standing in confusion and something close to grief, and her face immediately tightened. "Mr. Rivera, I had stepped outside briefly to retrieve supplier records. I wasn't aware of any situation." Nathan turned to her, his voice sharper now. "Where is the nanny?" Evelyn blinked. That wasn't the question she was prepared to answer. She hesitated, then adjusted her tone. "I believe she left. Perhaps an emergency." Nathan's eyes narrowed. Claire didn't interrupt. She didn't raise her voice. But when Evelyn turned her judgment toward her, Claire calmly explained everything. The scream, the filth, the note, and the silence of the house, and the decision she made, not as an employee, but as a human being. "You had no authority to do any of that,"
Evelyn snapped. "You are here to clean, not to touch the child, and certainly not to enter the master suite or kitchen with him." Nathan looked at Evelyn then, not with agreement, but with something else. Recognition. "She had more authority than anyone," he said quietly. The words hit her harder than if he had shouted. "We'll talk later," Nathan added. "Right now, I want time alone with my son and the woman who saved him this morning." Evelyn stood frozen, but her professionalism overrode her pride. She nodded once, turned, and walked out, her heels clicking in retreat like a drumbeat of defeat. And then, there were three.
The room settled into a heavy stillness once Evelyn's footsteps faded. Nathan stood by the entryway, arms crossed, lips slightly parted, like someone trying to make sense of a dream they hadn't meant to have. Claire remained seated on the sofa, Lucas nestled against her chest, his breathing even, his small fingers curling and uncurling in a slow rhythm. Something had shifted, not just in the room, in the air, in him. For the first time, Nathan wasn't thinking about meetings or project deadlines. He wasn't rehearsing boardroom speeches in his head. He was looking, really looking at his son, at the baby whose laughter he barely knew, whose tears he had often left for others to soothe. And now, he saw him asleep, peaceful, in the arms of a woman he had barely spoken more than 2 sentences to in 3 years. He cleared his throat, but his voice came out softer than he expected. "I owe you an apology." Claire looked up. It was the first time he had said anything to her that wasn't an instruction or a passing thank you. "I didn't expect to come home and find my son in someone else's arms, but I'm starting to think that might be the only reason he's still okay." Claire gave a small, nearly imperceptible nod. He needed someone. Nathan's eyes lingered on her for a beat longer, then drifted back to Lucas. "I've had a lot on my plate," he said, almost to himself. "Since my wife passed away, I've tried to keep everything together, but I guess trying isn't the same as being present." He looked around the house, his fortress, his creation. Everything was in order, everything gleamed. But the boy in Claire's arms, he hadn't been okay. "I never asked, but do you have children?" Claire shook her head. "No, I always thought I might. Life didn't go that way." Nathan nodded, though the words left a weight in the air between them. He saw something then, not just the quiet strength in her posture, but the sadness behind her eyes, the silence she wore like a uniform. She was more than what he'd allowed himself to notice. She always had been. "You've done an incredible thing today. You didn't have to, but you did." Claire's gaze dropped to Lucas's sleeping face. "I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because he was scared, because someone had to." Nathan inhaled deeply, his chest rising and falling as if the weight of years was slowly releasing with each breath. And then, without hesitation, he asked the question that surprised them both. Would you consider staying on as Lucas's full-time caregiver?" Claire's head lifted. I don't have any formal training," she replied. Her voice didn't waver, but her surprise was clear. "But you have something no resume can prove. You made him feel safe. You calmed him when no one else could, including me." He didn't add the other truth. He didn't know how to calm the child because he hadn't tried hard enough to learn. Claire was quiet for a long moment, not out of resistance, but contemplation. "I would do anything for him," she said slowly. "But this is your child, Mr. Rivera." "Nathan," he corrected gently. "Please." She hesitated,
then nodded. Nathan. There was no need for grand declarations, no need to define what this all meant just yet, but they both knew this wasn't just about a job anymore. Nathan glanced toward the kitchen. "I'll make tea," he said. Do you drink tea?" Claire smiled for the first time that morning. It was small, but real. "As long as it's not too bitter." Nathan chuckled lightly and moved toward the kitchen, fumbling a bit with the kettle as if he'd never touched it before, which, truthfully, he hadn't. Moments later, they sat across from each other at the long kitchen table, mugs in hand. The quiet between them wasn't awkward, it was calm. The kind of silence that grows between people who have just weathered something deeply human together. One evening, a week later, while Claire was dressing Lucas after his bath, the little boy cupped her face in his small hands, looked into her eyes, and whispered a single word. "Mummy." She froze. Time seemed to stop. Nathan, who had been watching from the doorway without her knowing it, heard it too. He didn't speak, didn't react with surprise or objection, but his eyes, they softened. He left without a word that night, but the next morning a small box sat on the kitchen counter, tied with a ribbon and no card. Inside was a simple bracelet, made of soft rope and worn edges. Claire picked it up gently, recognizing the intimacy in its humble design. Later, over tea, Nathan explained, "My wife made that when she was pregnant. She wore it every day." Claire looked at him, unsure what to say. "I don't know what the future looks like, but I do know you're a part of it." She nodded, tears stinging her eyes, but she held them back. Instead, she reached across the table and took his hand, letting the warmth of his fingers fill the space between them.
From that day forward, the house no longer operated like a clockwork machine. The quiet corridors no longer echoed with nothingness. Something had changed, not dramatically, not with fanfare, but like spring easing its way through the last chill of winter. Gently, unmistakably. Claire still woke early, still folded laundry with military precision, still prepared the lemon solution she used on the stair railings. But now, there were moments in between. Pauses where she sat on the floor with Lucas, building towers of colorful blocks. She sang songs she hadn't thought of in years. She let him feed her imaginary soup from plastic spoons, and laughed when he dropped more than he served. Nathan noticed. More importantly, Nathan joined. It began with small things, standing in the doorway to listen, asking Claire what Lucas had eaten that day, sitting beside them, awkwardly at first, then comfortably, watching how Lucas lit up whenever Claire clapped or kissed his forehead. And over time, Nathan learned. He learned that Lucas preferred instrumental lullabies over cartoons, that the little boy napped better when his teddy bear was slightly warm from the sun, that Claire hummed a particular lullaby every time she buttoned up his pajamas, like muscle memory from a life she never had but always understood. Nathan began working from his ground floor study just so he could hear his son's laughter down the hallway. Sometimes, he'd peek out and find Lucas waddling through the living room with both hands holding onto Claire's fingers like she was the only compass he knew. There were no grand declarations, no romantic cliches, but when Nathan spilled her tea one morning trying to be helpful, and Claire simply laughed, not politely, but freely, he realized he hadn't heard that sound in years. Not in this house, not since before the grief set in. One evening, as dusk draped the windows in golden amber, Nathan sat on the sofa with Lucas curled on his lap, half asleep. Claire sat nearby, quietly folding towels. Nathan looked up at her. "You said once that life didn't lead you toward having children," he murmured. Claire looked at him, eyebrows raised, unsure where he was going. "I think life had other plans. Maybe you weren't meant to have a child. Maybe you were meant to be his mother." The words hung there, soft but solid. Claire blinked slowly, then smiled, not because she agreed, but because some part of her had longed for someone to say it out loud. "I wanted to be a teacher once," she said quietly, "but the bills didn't care about my dreams." Nathan's face darkened briefly. "Do you have family?" Claire paused. "My mother passed when I was a teenager. I lived with my aunt. She died 4 years ago." "I'm sorry," Nathan said. And for the first time, he truly meant it, not as a courtesy, but as someone who now understood what it meant to lose someone and carry on in silence. Claire gave a soft nod. "I've been alone a long time, but somehow with him, I don't feel it anymore." Nathan didn't respond. He didn't need to. It was all already in his eyes. That night, as rain tapped gently against the glass, Nathan opened a small velvet box across the kitchen table. Inside wasn't a ring. It wasn't anything expensive. It was a bracelet. Thin, woven, faded. "My wife made this when she was pregnant," he said quietly. "It was supposed to be a keepsake. I kept it locked away for years, but tonight it feels like maybe it's time." Claire reached out and took it without a word. Her fingers brushed his, and the warmth was enough to say everything they hadn't dared to say aloud. They didn't speak of marriage right away, but the bond was there. Solid, gentle, unshakable. A few weeks later, Claire moved into a room closer to Lucas's. No one announced it, no ceremony, but her toothbrush was in the upstairs bathroom, her shoes by the door, her laughter in the halls. Lucas began calling her mommy without being prompted. The first time Nathan heard it, he froze mid-step. Claire had just scooped Lucas into her arms after breakfast, and the boy had whispered it like it was the most natural word in the world. "Mommy." Nathan watched silently, his eyes shivering with something between joy and heartbreak. Claire blinked fast, her throat tight. And Nathan knew. This was no longer just about roles. This wasn't a nanny, a housekeeper, a boss. This was family. They were married in spring. No ballroom, no white gowns, just a small ceremony in the backyard garden, under soft sunlight and a canopy of white flowers. A few close friends, a toddler with cake on his nose, laughter that sounded like something being healed. And since then, everything changed. The portraits on the wall, once sterile and abstract, were replaced with photographs of them smiling under trees, Lucas mid-laugh, Claire kissing his cheek, Nathan holding both of them like they were the only things that ever mattered. The kitchen always smelled like cinnamon or cookies. The music that played wasn't classical piano, but children's songs and soft humming. Even the study, once closed off like a vault, was now a place where building blocks and architectural models shared space on the same desk. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled in the distance, Lucas ran into the living room, barefooted and wild-haired. He launched into Nathan's lap and then pulled Claire onto the couch beside them. And for the first time, unprompted, he shouted, "Mommy! Daddy!" The two adults froze. Claire's eyes glistened. Nathan kissed the boy's forehead and for a moment said nothing. They didn't need to. That one word, "Mommy, Daddy," was enough. Enough to erase the lonely mornings. Enough to forgive the things they hadn't said. Enough to heal. Love didn't arrive with flowers or perfect timing. It arrived in the form of a baby bathed in a kitchen sink. In the quiet courage of a woman who simply stepped forward when no one else did. In the soft breaking open of a man who had built walls to keep grief out, and unknowingly kept joy out too. And that, dear viewers, is the story of how family can find you, not in the perfect places, but in the imperfect moments. So if you're carrying pain or silence, or a sense that love may have forgotten you, maybe it hasn't. Maybe it's waiting in your kitchen.
Sometimes, the deepest love begins not with romance, but with responsibility. Not with titles, but with presence. And the people meant for us often arrive quietly, not to rescue us, but to remind us how to rescue ourselves together. If this story moved you, please subscribe to John's Stories channel and join us for more heartfelt tales like this every single day.